We'll be starting the session in just a moment. If you have any connection or technical issues, try refreshing your browser first. If this doesn't work, please go to the Help Desk by clicking Sessions on the left or click the People tab on the right and search Help Desk to send a private message. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the second week of our Menus of Change Leadership Summit virtual series. I'm Sarah Schutzberger, Director of Health and Sustainability for the Strategic Initiative Group at the Culinary Institute of America and Program Director for this virtual series. We had an amazing launch a week ago with a sold-out audience joining us for the live event and many more checking out our live stream and recorded webcast. If you joined us for week one, welcome back. And if you missed last week's session, don't despair. You can still check out the great content on our website, menusofchange.org. As with many of you, we at the CAA had to quickly adjust our conference models to the new social distancing guidelines. But we're so excited that this pivot to a virtual platform means we are able to reach many more people than we previously would have. Thank you to our platinum sponsor, Kellogg's Away From Home, our gold sponsor, Land O'Lakes, our bronze sponsors, Nestle Professional and Oatly, as well as our supporting and corporate sponsors. Their sustained support of Menus of Change helps us bring this programming to you tuition-free, and we hope you'll take a minute to We'll hope you'll make a point to visit them in the expo and networking breaks. Before we dive into this week's content, a reminder that you can access all of the presentations and recipes on our website with the email that was sent to registered attendees earlier this week. Additionally, one of the things that distinguishes this virtual series from other webinars is that we've built an environment that helps you connect and network with your peers and industry colleagues in real time. You can search for other attendees using the People's tab to send a direct message, as well as invite them to video chat. We also have our networking feature that randomly matches you with another attendee for a quick 4-minute chat. This week, our networking topic is centered around consumer preferences for plant-forward menus amidst the pandemic. Additionally, we'd love to hear what's going on in your operation. So we've built out some polls in the poll feature, which we'll be coming back to throughout today's session. In fact, our first poll is up and running. Today we're asking, compared to years past, are you now serving more plant-based foods to guests? I can't wait to see what your answers are. In week one, we heard from leading scientists about how PlantForward continues to have relevance, even as many of us confront a more immediate crisis in the coronavirus pandemic. Hearing from a wide variety of chefs, operators, and scientists, we talked about the larger environmental and public health imperatives for why PlantForward matters. For me, one of the standout moments was hearing Dr. Fauzi remind us that our menus are made up of food and not nutrients. And in order to stay healthy, we need to take care of our immune system by getting enough sleep, exercising, and by consuming a plant-forward diet. This week, we will take a deeper look at the data at the intersection of food, health, and sustainability, and we'll see how that has been reshaped by the pandemic. We'll also learn how we should communicate about these scientifically complex and often overwhelming topics to our guests. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome to the stage Deanne Brandstetter, Vice President of Nutrition and Wellness for Compass Group, where she leads a team that coordinates wellness programs for food service clients and develops award-winning cross-sector nutrition and wellness initiatives. Deanne is also co-chair of the CIA Healthy Menus R&D Collaborative. It is my honor to welcome Deanne. Deanne, welcome to the stage.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm delighted to be part of this year's virtual Menus of Change conference and to moderate this panel. At Compass Group, and certainly across the broader volume food service industry, we were seeing a very strong pre-COVID movement towards plant forward. But the world has changed. The goal of this panel is to give you a sense of where consumers are right now and what the huge volume of consumer data is telling us with regard to plant-forward diets and plant-based protein. To look at the effective operational strategies around plant-forward menus in today's environment, and finally, to look at the issue of equity, how volume food service operators can help make plant-forward diets more accessible to communities of color. To do that, I have a wonderful group of panelists, Jack Lee, Zach Weston, and Daryl Scott. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce you to Jack Lee. Jack Lee is known to many of you. He's the president and haiku master at Data Central. During his 20-year tenure with Data Central, Jack has created multiple tools that dramatically improve the innovation process for the food service industry, including menu trends, haiku to predict foods trends, scores, concept screening, and the Horizon model to help companies fill their long-term innovation pipeline. And I have to give Jack a huge personal thanks on behalf of the whole industry for his COVID initiative during the last 4 months, The Way Forward, where he's made over 28 reports, weekly webcasts, countless interviews, all available to food service operators at no cost to help us stay in touch with the consumer during this unprecedented time. I'll turn it over to you, Jack.
We're gonna, apologies to everybody watching right now. We are taking Jack off just to see if we can resolve his audio issues. Sometimes refreshing the browser and taking him off sort of helps with that. Let's see, how are we now, Jack? No, unfortunately, and I'm not sure what changed. Unfortunately, we had tested this right before. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to bring Zach in instead. Zach is the food service analyst at the Good Food Institute. If you were joining us for the Global PlantForward Culinary Summit, you may have seen him present there as well. But we are going to try to bring Zach. And Zach, how's your sound?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Great. All right. Thank you so much for jumping in here at the last minute. Again, we're going to try to resolve those issues with Jack. I know he's got a ton of great information for us. But in the meantime, let's hear all the data that you've got from the Good Food Institute, Zach.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name is Zach with the Good Food Institute. We're a nonprofit research-driven think tank that promotes plant-based and alternative proteins to create a healthier, more sustainable food system. And I'm really excited today to be talking briefly with you about some of the plant-based and other alternative protein technologies, what we're seeing in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated lockdowns, as well as a little bit about how we think plant-based can have a role in helping to rebuild the food service industry. The first thing I wanted to note right out of the gate is something we probably all recognize, is that plant-based had a very good 2019, and in particular, plant-based meat had an excellent year. According to NPD's Supply Track service, which aggregates wholesale broadline food service sales from distributors such as Sysco or US Foods, plant-based meat dollar sales grew 37% year over year from 2018 to 2019. We also saw from a different way of looking at the data from Mintel, looking at menu penetration, extraordinarily strong growth for plant-based meat menu penetration and mentions on different menus. That is growing especially predominantly or quickly in family and mid-scale dining, as well as in QSR, the fast food channel. We also saw, based on research that NPD Supply Track shared with the Good Food Institute, that plant-based burgers are displacing multiple types of animal proteins. So in other words, when operators start buying more plant-based burgers, they start buying less of multiple kinds of proteins, including various kinds of animal proteins. I think this is a really strong signal that the theory of change behind menus of change and a lot of the work that we do in the PlantForward space is working, that we're able to swap in a little bit healthier, a little bit more sustainable options for diners, and they are actually changing some of their consumption patterns. Now, this is also an opportunity, of course, for operators, restaurant chains, who are looking to attract back diners who maybe they've lost for specific occasions or particular product formats or to other segments. This is an opportunity to use plant-based as a magnet to draw back consumers potentially and attract new customers. Of course, that was all pre-pandemic. What have we seen since then? So far, the results seem to indicate that things are going fairly well for the plant-based industry, even in the midst of the pandemic. This chart is looking at retail sales in the United States, the grocery channel. And what we've seen is that plant-based meat dollar sales have consistently kept pace with, and in some cases outpaced, the dollar sales growth of animal protein. It's a much smaller market, to be sure, but it's encouraging to see. We've also seen some consumers pay a little bit more attention to dietary choices and maybe recognizing the link between zoonotic diseases that jump from animals to humans, like the coronavirus, and things like COVID-19 and the dietary choices they make on their plates. We saw almost a quarter of consumers self-reporting, it's a survey, it's aspirational, but that they're eating more. We've seen a number of consumers, based on probably research that Jack will update in a little bit, showing that a lot of consumers are becoming more aware maybe of some of the shortages available in the animal protein supply chain, and consequently are willing to take a closer look at plant-based meat as an option for replacing that or integrating that into their diets. And then we also saw a lot of consumers who've expressed just a generalized sense of maybe being a little bit more hesitant to have animal proteins in their diet. And in particular, those who said yes to that over-indexed for being younger, Gen Z, millennials, etc. There are also other positive signals for why we think plant-based is doing fairly well during and even in the post part of the pandemic. A good example of this is China. China was, of course, where the coronavirus originated, but it was also one of the first countries where lockdowns started slowly being lifted. And what we've seen across China in a variety of chains is launches from many different plant-based meat brands in a variety of very mainstream and large restaurant chains, indicating that a lot of those chains are trying to use plant-based meat in part as one of the things in their tool belt to try to rebuild traffic and attract in consumers. We also saw very recently in the United States, which of course is emerging from lockdowns at a different rate from a lot of other countries, some recent plant-based launches from KFC, Southern California launch of Beyond Meat Fried Chicken, and then Starbucks launching nationally with an Impossible Breakfast Sandwich, continuing the trend of plant-based sort of moving beyond the burger occasion and format. These are also, we think, positive signals for plant-based being a way to help rebuild traffic, bring consumers back. We additionally saw, and this is something that feels a little bit like reading out of a science fiction novel, but we saw that KFC Russia, which is not a chain I was anticipating, announced earlier in the month that they were planning to do a test of 3D printed, cultivated chicken nuggets and have that available at some point for their consumers. This is certainly a significant milestone in a completely new alternative protein category, but kind of interesting and certainly not the chain that I necessarily would have expected, but still a really interesting marketing push. We've also seen some other more sort of high-level effects from the pandemic. It certainly is shining a really bright spotlight on the animal protein supply chain. There are a number of considerations, and there's a number of slaughterhouse pictures in the news that consumers haven't usually had to deal with. And that typically isn't, I think, what that kind of supply chain is necessarily interested in. In particular, a lot of the reporting is focused on meat shortages, which, again, consumers have felt very much when they go to the grocery store, as well as the high infection rates of a lot of the workers who are often disproportionately minorities or different oppressed, more marginalized populations. So there is a certainly, we're kind of, guys, I would call it the world's largest ever case study of the risks inherent in the animal protein supply chain and some of its vulnerabilities. And I think in contrast, the plant-based industry has to offer an alternative vision. I think there's an opportunity here in the area of culinary creativity. Obviously, plant-based allows you to cook with entirely new foods and ingredients, but also reformulate existing stuff and put a new twist on an old classic. It's also becoming increasingly versatile. We're seeing that plant protein can be added to your pantry and give you 15, 20 different dishes if you so desire. So that's improving, and we're also, of course, seeing it play more of a role in being able to be blended or serve as a centerpiece to conduct the protein flip to make plants more the center of the protein and spread that protein a little bit more around the plate instead of in a hunk of center of plate protein. It also, of course, has a lot of consumer appeal. I don't have a lot of these numbers with me, but I'd be happy to share if anyone's interested. Case studies showing how plant-based meat launches have attracted new consumers, raised check averages as consumers are willing to pay a little bit of a premium, eliminating veto vote situations in group dining, and aging down your brand, which is particularly relevant right now with the rise of digital channels and how younger consumers are very interested in using digital channels for ordering. At the Good Food Institute, we think that plant-based is a long-term paradigm shift, not just a passing fad. We think this because repeat purchase rates, where we've been able to measure them, are high. There's a wide diversity of motivations. Some people come into this category for health, some for taste, some for sustainability, some for animal welfare. There's a variety of reasons. And there's also a wide variety of products and different types of consumers who are interested in consuming them. We've also seen that plant-based has entered into multiple categories and channels, and it's stayed on menus, it's gotten increased advertising spend, and in some cases, chains have launched additional products. We also expect, as we see millennials and Gen Z age into more purchasing power, and particularly as they become parents, that they'll start introducing their kids to plant-based in an early age. There's a coming tidal wave of demand for plant-based foods. We also expect it to expand well beyond the burger, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, into sausage alternatives. We've seen a lot of moves in the breakfast category, Dunkin' and Starbucks being primary examples of that. The Mexican category, a lot of moves there, as well as in plant-based meat pizza toppings. We expect a lot of moves over the rest of 2020 and into 2021 in the Italian segment, as well as in chicken products, plant-based chicken products, and plant-based dairy. We also expect that increasingly chefs and recipe developers for large CPG companies will start formulating their products to be predominantly plant-based, even just accidentally, because it's a way to appeal to everyone's needs. If you can formulate using ingredients that appeal to, say, 99% of the population instead of just 90 or 95%, that actually matters at the scale at which we have to do food service. And so we expect that just like kosher is a relatively widespread food attribute, even though it's a relatively small dietary pattern, we fully expect that fully plant-based will become more mainstream just by virtue of being able to reach more consumers. And we don't expect the core drivers of what's causing consumers to be interested in these products to change anytime soon. So it's important to recognize, based on the research that GFI and the World Resources Institute and many others have done, that taste needs to be the primary message in your messaging hierarchy, using images, using every part of your toolkit, your menu description, everything to emphasize flavor first, and then all of the other important drivers as well along the way: price, health, familiarity, etc. We expect all that to remain fairly consistent going forward. I'll close with this slide, just to note that plant-based products are going to continue to improve. There's a lot of new technologies that we focus on and study at the Good Food Institute. I'm always happy to share more information about those if anyone's curious, but it's important to remember that this is, in a lot of ways, still a fairly young category. And as we're able to invest a lot more in research and development to further the science behind these technologies, as well as we're able to invest in additional production capacity, that allows us to make sure volumes go up so that we don't have supply shortages. It enables the industry to create better products, products that taste better, products that are cleaner label, have better nutrition, better texture, more biodiverse protein inputs. And of course, it allows your prices to go down, which is worth emphasizing. We're also seeing a broad diversity of novel proteins, so different types of crops that we can use as protein sources for these products. And additionally, new forms of food technology, using recombinant proteins, brewing protein, using fermentation, using algae or fungi as production mechanisms for creating proteins. An incredible array of new technologies coming online that, again, will allow us to create really unique and new to the world experiences with food. And with that, I'll close, and happy to discuss any of these in further detail during the Q&A or via email afterwards.
Thanks so much, Zach. I think really great information and an exciting glimpse at what's to come in the innovation pipeline that we can all look forward to. So I'd like to welcome Jack Lee back on the stage. I think we have his sound issues resolved.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we're good.
Right.
All right, take it away, Jack.
That is awesome. Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks to Zach for the fantastic presentation, and thanks to you all for bearing through the technical glitch. I think we got the microphone fixed. It's probably actually a good thing that happened, because I just had a plant-based snack prior to this thing kicking off and realized just now that I had plant-based food residue stuck between my teeth. So I've now rinsed out. You don't have to look at that anymore, and we can get on to the presentation. So again, my name is Jack with a company called Data Essential. We're all about providing answers to the food industry. What we're going to do for the next 10 minutes or so is highlight some top-level insights from our PlantForward Opportunities report that we've collaborated with CIA on, and that you could actually download from the Menus of Change website following this presentation. This actually builds on some earlier learnings from the CIA Harvard PlantForward by the Numbers study, which also featured a good deal of Data Essential insight. And we thought we'd just sort of highlight some of the more important things we think there are going forward. So we'll start by just looking at how people eat in America today, their eating approach and the relationship with meat and plants. And as of today, about 69% of consumers are sort of unabashed meat eaters, not looking to restrict anything. They're just, hey, I'm a meat eater through and through. And you can see the numbers for the other categories, right? Vegetarians and vegans tend to be relatively small populations. Flexitarians, though, tend to be a much larger population than vegans and vegetarians. The question is, how do people actually want to eat, right? So if you could change your eating style, immediately, and what do you aspire to be? This is what it sort of looks like, tomorrow. What our aspirations are. You have a net preponderance of people that say, I don't want to be a full-time meat eater anymore. And you have gains in all the other categories, or most of the other categories. You have a bump in the percentage of people that want to be a vegetarian or a vegan. But the most important gain, and the largest one, is the increase in the percentage of folks that want to be flexitarians. So we have a pretty good built-in initial audience just in terms of who wants to be living this lifestyle. And if you look at the protein desires that consumers have, 58% of consumers say, I actually want to increase my intake of plant-based foods. Only 4%, so like 1 out of every 25 people, really small numbers, say they actually want to decrease that. Versus the other end of the spectrum, you have a net number of folks that say they would actually want to decrease the red meat intake versus fewer that want to increase the red meat intake. But the key is that we have a lot of pent-up desire, 58% of the country, right? So it's over 200 million people that want to increase their plant-based food intake. And people get, too, that there's benefits to plant-based or plant-forward eating. One is that it's healthier, right? 70% of people say, yeah, I get it. This would be better for me. Almost 2/3 instantly see now, oh, yeah, this would be better for the environment as well. So it's not as though there isn't some level of awareness as to why this might be a better way of eating or a better lifestyle. A lot of that exists in the market already. We could certainly reinforce it with additional and better and stronger and more frequent messaging. But at its core, people understand this is a positive thing. And if we dial this into specifically restaurant opportunities, these are the day parts during which consumers in the US are interested in meatless meals. Lunch is the predominant day part where they'd have the greatest amount of interest. So this is maybe where some of those initial innovation efforts should focus. And then you see it too at dinner. Not quite as much so at breakfast. So we probably have to be a little bit more inventive over there. But there is a considerable appetite for this already. The issue, though, is that what people say they want to do does not always turn into what they actually do. Our aspirations don't always reflect the ultimate reality. So for us that are part of this initiative, there are some pretty big challenges that we have to overcome with consumers as we help blaze this plant forward trail. People say they want it, they say they like it, they say they see the benefits, but will they actually do it? It's really not that different than folks that just say, hey, I want to be healthier. Everyone says I want to be healthier. A lot of people don't end up going on to doing the healthy thing. So how do we enable that in some way? Well, first we should understand some of the mental roadblocks that may exist or some of the perceptual challenges that we're going to have to overcome. One is that a majority of consumers believe that animals are still thought to be a better source of protein or a more efficient source of protein than our plants. And you can see this in the numbers, right? Almost 2/3 say they prefer animal protein over plant protein. About half even think that animal protein could be healthier for them than plant protein, right? So these are some perceptual things that we do need to address. But the flip side of it is you have a lot of people, 2/3 saying there are 67% of consumers in this country that say they want to try more dishes that mix plant and animal protein together, right? So the push to say, hey, just cut animal protein out of your diet completely, that might be a bridge too far for some, but a large majority, 2 out of 3 people say, you know what, I'm good with this idea of like having more plant and animal protein coexist inside of a dish. That feels like a very natural thing for me, and that could be a fantastic first step. And if you think about what this actually means, you have sort of this universe of plant-based product, which right now a lot of it focuses on things with meat replacers and plant-based burgers. That is an opportunity, and it's been growing and exploding, and Zach did a really fantastic job highlighting all the different ways it will continue to manifest and expand. But there's also a broader category that we've called plant forward, which is not just the things that are strictly plant-based, but they could be dishes that have a mix of plant-based foods and perhaps even some animal protein, but not in the same heavy quantities of animal protein that we've traditionally seen in center of plate dishes, for instance, where meat is maybe still on there, but not the core focus of the item. That is the larger opportunity, at least today. And we hear that from consumers. 67% say, hey, I'm all in for this idea. But there are some concerns too. And we talked about one of them, which is maybe it's not thought to be the best source of protein. Some people also say, hey, I don't really know if like my mood is going to fit, if eating plant forward is going to fit my mood at a time or the occasion that I'm in. There's a little bit of that too. Then you have, hey, I don't know if plant forward eating is going to give me enough protein. We chatted about that and how we need to communicate around that. But there are 3 other things that are even larger concerns in consumers' minds, and I wanted to go through them one at a time. And I would ask you all, can you sort of predict, maybe even just guess in chat, what are those 3 other things that are a concern? So I'm going to go through this sort of quickly. So if you're really good at typing, you can chat real fast and see if you can beat everybody else, I guess. But number 3 is that, well, I don't want to pay too much for plant-based ingredients. We do have a bit of a mental trap where people think that value comes from meat, right? That you're spending a certain amount of money on a dish, that there's an expectation that the meat is what's driving the cost. Well, in actuality, I mean, if you think about it from an operator's perspective, sometimes you're paying more for that produce than you are for the meat, but consumers don't always perceive that. So we need to elevate the perception of produce and plant foods as something being premium inside those dishes. Number 2 is I might worry that I might still be hungry in a couple of hours right after I eat my plant-based dish or my plant-forward dish. So this may or may not be the case depending on what that dish is, but there is a perception there that satiety is not addressed as much as it would be in a meat-based dish. So we need to show that this is actually going to be a satisfying thing that's going to sort of do all the things that a good meal should for you in terms of satiety. And then number one thing, and I think you may have guessed this, is I'm not sure if it might taste very good if this is a plant-forward meal or plant-forward dish that doesn't have any meat to it. And if you think about those top 3 items, they actually provide sort of a roadmap for corrective fixes that we would make in how we sort of drive plant-forward forward, right? So it might not taste very good. Well, the solution is to take a flavor-first approach. Right? So many times in the past, we've said, well, let's make a healthy item. This goes long back. Let's make a healthy item. Let's make it a health first item, and then flavor becomes sort of like an afterthought. And as a result, like no one actually ever ends up ordering that thing because we still think flavor first. So the first rule of innovation with PlantForward is it should be flavor first innovation. The fact that it is a PlantForward item is almost secondary to that. Flavor has to come first. And then it just happens to be something that's PlantForward and good for you on top of that. And these should be things that are created and marketed as satisfying dishes to the consumer, that we negate that thinking that this is something that's not going to hold them over until the next meal. And then, this notion that, hey, I don't want to pay too much just for plant-based ingredients. I miss having the meat on my thing. I think that's where I get the value from. Well, we need to spotlight in those dishes what's there instead of what's not there. It's not about the absence of meat. It's about the presence of all this other great stuff. And, sort of think about this. If we keep going and say, hey, eat plant-based, eat plant-forward, a lot of us in the industry understand what that means and how broad of a term those things can be. And we also see in our research, a lot of consumers are now familiar with those terms. But there is sort of this underlying thing that we, put everything under this giant umbrella and refer to everything publicly as just plant. I think some people can't help but get this image in their mind. Oh, is that like eating grass or something? When there's so much diversity in that plant world of things that are totally yummy, and we should be talking about those things. When you think plant, you might think, oh, no meat. But when you think about all the different types of vegetable and produce and other plant-based foods specifically, it eradicates that, right? You could actually focus on what's actually there instead. So this is the mantra, those 3 things we looked at: flavor first, satisfying dishes that spotlight what's there instead of what's not. I think that's the actual strategy that moves us forward. Flavor first, satisfying dishes that spotlight what's there instead of what's not. We have a system called Scores, which looks at every new item and limited time offer that chain restaurants launch. And we update it every couple of weeks, and we have those items rated by consumers as they launch. So over the last few years, there's been like 40,000 things that have launched at chain restaurants. We track all of them. We looked through this. We said, can we find many good examples of really plant-forward items served up at chain restaurants where it's largely plant-based or minimal meat type of dish, and it has a feeling of healthiness as well. And to be honest, there is a disproportionately small amount of those items that chains have actually launched. So I think we're not really doing our job right now as an industry to actually put these new ideas in front of consumers. There's a lot more we could do, but that's not to say it can't be successful. We do see some really great examples in there, right? Here's an item that scored pretty well on both the metric of purchase interest from consumers and also thought to be pretty unique. Here's a cauliflower infused rigatoni that they're calling caulifloodles. And you see the other ingredients there at Noodles & Company. But these examples are too few and far between in our estimation. And to us, this really is an innovation challenge, right? The challenge is maybe 10% messaging to the consumer and 90% innovation. We drive this thing forward if we put really tasty looking offerings in front of the consumer where they don't feel like they're compromising, right? And I'll go back and close out with that same thing we said before that I think really is a strategy forward, which is let's put out more flavor first, satisfying dishes that spotlight what's there instead of what's not. That's what works. That's what we think is going to be totally craveable by people. And we should be doing a lot more of it. So thank you again. Thanks for bearing through the microphone issues. And I will kick it back to Deanne. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Jack. Great information as usual, and some really good strategies for operators. So I'd now like to introduce our final speaker, Daryl Scott. Daryl is the founder of Earth in Color, a burgeoning social enterprise that connects young adults to nature, healthy eating, and intentional living. This work centers on the histories and lived experiences of Black people and other people of color. Daryl is on a mission to heal intergenerational, nature-related traumas, turning environmental apathy into earth curiosity, environmental stewardship, and joy. Welcome, Daryl.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to share my screen really quick, so bear with me for a second as I get my slides up. So it's funny, 2 years ago today, I actually, well, not today, but I attended the Menus of Change conference in person as a graduate student. And I was studying at Stanford, and I was a design fellow with the Stanford D School, and our project was the Menus of Change initiative. So this speaking engagement is really an opportunity to bring my work full circle. A little bit about me: I'm a designer, I'm an environmental and sustainability scientist, and my work is really at the intersections of design, sustainability, and culture. I graduated from Stanford last January with my master's in sustainability science and practice. And as Deanne said, I'm the founder of Earth and Color, and it's really this amazing organization that I started right outside of college. And, you know, there is a really crucial and an exciting part of our work that is actually Earth and Color Eats, which are these home cooking recipes that help people fall back in love with plants. So food is very much embedded into the work that we're doing. So that's just my background. Today, I'm going to focus less on how the coronavirus has really impacted the eating experience as it relates to safety, and rather, I'm going to speak to the ways that this moment of collective reckoning is shifting our values and actions. And I'm going to talk about the ways that we can create menus that truly can be agents of change. In addition to increasing concerns about health and safety, COVID-19 has brought the issues of racial inequality into sharp focus. People of color are more likely to get COVID-19 and be hospitalized. So as you see at the top left, this is a graph from the CDC. And the realization of inequity is really compounded by this collective reckoning with racism and the ways that it is deeply embedded into our social fabric. And the food system of which we all are a part is not immune to this. And many are calling this the new normal. So for this presentation, I want to talk about the new normal. So I want us to talk about pre and post coronavirus as a way for us to think about how this Menus of Change community can support the creation of a healthy, sustainable, diverse, just, and inclusive eating experience. And for this presentation, I'm going to focus on inclusion of eaters of color and how this new normal and cultural trends really influence the eating experience and the ways that this community can create an inclusive eating experience. So at a high level, inclusive eating is about connecting personal and planetary health. It's about affirming culture and tradition, and it's about collaborating with eaters. Before the coronavirus outbreak, Yale conducted a study that's a part of their six global warming Americas work. And they found that people of color, specifically Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and Black folks are more concerned about climate change. Your eyebrows might be raising right now. And also before the outbreak, studies also showed that, and this is from the Washington Post, this is a headline from the Washington Post, which cites Pew Research Center data. And the headline reads that, you know, Black folks are the fastest growing vegan population. So your eyebrows might be raising again. And it's probably because traditional narratives around healthy, sustainable, plant-forward, plant-rich, climate beneficial, you know, this way of living and eating doesn't often center these eaters, these voices. And I actually just, you know, looked up vegan people and filtered for images with people on Shutterstock just to kind of see what the face of climate beneficial eating, veganism is. And, you know, these images aren't very much representative of the growing demographic of people, and we have the opportunity to change that. So as you probably know, these traditional narratives aren't centered around these diverse voices. And, studies are showing that people of color do care, or maybe care even more, and that they're primed for veggie forward eating. And quite frankly, they are a growing subset of the population. And so inclusive eats is an immense opportunity for us to meet the needs of a wider range of eaters. So let's just get into the inclusive eats framework that I'm setting up for this presentation. Connect personal and planetary health. So I'm going to go back to the article that I mentioned at the beginning about Black people being the fastest growing vegan population. And if you read further, you'll see that this rise of veganism in the Black community is due to a collective reckoning with the fact that our community has some of the highest rates of diet-related disease. And this insight can truly inform how you message and how you talk about plant-forward eating, and centering it around health. And I put this picture here on the bottom right, because oftentimes when we talk about Black folks and people of color and climate change and eating, we often talk about folks who don't have access to fresh, affordable food. And I just wanted to use this moment to kind of debunk the idea that the demand is not there. So just because people don't have access to these fresh, affordable foods doesn't mean that they don't desire veggie forward foods. And I just wanted to use this moment to talk about this, because this kind of way of thinking is quite prevalent, and it really presents, it presents a missed opportunity for engaging eaters who are primed to eat in a plant-forward way. And the bottom right, I'm just featuring Supermarket, which is an entity that is doing work to end food apartheid in Southern California, really showing that there is a desire for these veggie-forward foods across the socioeconomic spectrum in communities of color. So affirming culture and tradition. This is actually embedded in 2 menus of change principles. So I will just use this opportunity to add some color to them. We must go beyond just simply leveraging. We must affirm and include diverse cultures, heritages, and traditions. And, this is not about, being extractive and just like taking strategies as inspiration and putting them into our menus. This is about honoring culture and tradition and connecting people of color to their plant-based, plant-forward traditions, and celebrating the fact that centering veggies isn't a new idea. And it's something that, diverse cuisines have incorporated for ages, for generations. And so when we talk about leveraging these cuisines, it's about affirmation and celebration. And it's really beautiful to see that Menus of Change has these principles, but I wanted to take time to kind of bring these up and double tap on some of the points that are embedded in these 2 principles. And finally, collaborate with eaters. There are so many eaters, especially those of you who are serving universities. There's so many eaters that are bringing knowledge and expertise and excitement about their cultural cuisines. And creating this inclusive eating experience can be a collaborative experience that brings eaters of color into the menu development process and the storytelling process about your menus. And when I was thinking about this, the cool thing about this is that this collaborative eating experience creates an opportunity for your menus and your messaging to facilitate this kind of like cross-cultural empathy and learning. And what's beautiful about this is all sparked by your decisions, your menu decisions, and you're creating really these moments of reciprocal learning. And I think that that's really cool, and it's really, really beautiful and important in this moment. And so I'll close with just a few thoughts. What I've presented today not only shows that people of color are very much interested in this and are primed, and that our menus should celebrate and center, but that it's not just about tactics. It's about us really taking on these new postures, asking questions, being ready to learn, leading with humility, cooking with courage. And I'll close with just 1 or 2 sentences that, this work is not just a nice to have. This new normal is showing us that inclusion is a must have. And we are really at a turning point where we can make our menus of change. Thank you all so much. I'm happy to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. And thank you again to Jack and Zach as well. I hope you got as much out of this panel as I did. I'm leaving with a lot of good ideas as an operator. We don't have time for Q&A. We are ending right on time. But there will be some breakout sessions if you're interested in talking about this topic more of consumer sentiment, equity in the PlantForward space. So I'm going to turn it back to Sarah for your next instructions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Deanne, Jack, Zach, and Daryl. We're now going to breakout sessions, and you'll be able to choose your breakout session by going to the Sessions tab on the left of your screen. Have fun, be inspired, and we'll see you back here shortly.